going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Terminator Training Show. This is going to be back to Q&As this week. Last week I did a single topic episode on recovery habits for selection prep. So back to Q&As, and this is my second recording of this episode because, like a dummy, yesterday I, for whatever reason, forgot to do a mic check and thus forgot to turn my mic on. So I recorded an entire podcast over an hour with no mic on. So that was not very fun when I uploaded it to my editing software to go through the episode and make sure it was good to go. There was no words. It was just a 1 hour, 17-minute video of me talking, but with absolutely no sound. So that sucked, but we're back for round two. And going to be a good solid episode. I've gone through, since I didn't do this last week, I've gone through last week's questions as well as this week's questions and just kind of annotated some of the better ones that I want to get to. Just because yours may not be on here does not mean it's not a good question. And that goes, the same thing goes for if I don't answer it on Instagram. I'm just getting a lot of questions lately. So keep asking if you want your question answered. If you keep asking the same one over and over and I don't answer that, it's probably because the question needs improvement. But either way, today we're going to get to some of the top questions. I think I annotated about 21 of them yesterday when I did my practice recording. I got to, I think, 16 or 17. So I definitely went pretty deep on a couple of them. We'll see what happens today, but I'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So let's hop into the show. How far or for what time are you carrying the jerry cans at selection? So the jerry cans are during team week, you carry cans full of, they look like gas cans. They can be used for water as well. Not both, probably wouldn't go back and forth, but they're full of water and you carry them during team week events, during certain team week events. I can't remember how many, at least one. And I jokingly said in my Instagram story response that you should just expect to carry them indefinitely because you carry them for a very long time. And then once you actually do finish, because you will eventually finish, it'll be a nice, pleasant surprise because you were expecting to just do it forever. But obviously that's, not the case. It's several miles. I don't know exactly how far, but you're going to be carrying these, not just you nonstop carrying one in each hand without any breaks. Of course, that's just not humanly possible, especially if you're already smoked. You're going to be smoked starting team week, but if this isn't the first event, you're already going to be smoked going into this event. And between your team, you're going to have a certain amount of jerry cans that you need to carry a certain distance. And then sometimes you'll also have other objects to carry at the same time. Not necessarily you carrying something on your back and doing jerry cans, although I wouldn't rule that out completely. But you'll have to carry stuff in a low position, a farmer's carry position, or if you have it in one hand at a time, a suitcase carry position, of course, with your ruck on. And you will have opportunities to switch out with your teammates. You'll have opportunities to put them down. If you have one, you can obviously switch hands periodically when your grip gets smoked. But at this point, you're pretty smoked. Your hands are kind of messed up, especially if you go in a class where there's a lot of vegetation and a lot of thorns in the woods, briars, etc. So you're doing this after land nav and your hands will get typically pretty messed up during that. Definitely, I would suggest taking care of your hands and try to wear gloves whenever able during land nav, but it's not always possible. And yeah, your hands are going to be to a degree pretty messed up. If you go in the winter time, your hands are going to be cold. So either way, the conditions for this are not great, but it's very doable. You're just going to have to practice your carries a lot in order to prepare for it. Obviously, you want really good grip endurance and, well, to a lesser extent, grip strength. A lot of people will train grip strength by doing very, very, very heavy carries. And while that's fine to do sometimes, heavy carries are not going to transfer super well over to lighter, very, very long carries. So if you wanted to prioritize, they're also very fatiguing. So if you wanted to prioritize a carry modality, you would probably prioritize a lower weight, longer duration carry in your training program, in your preparation. These things weigh about 45 to 55 pounds, most likely, give or take. So they're not super duper heavy, but you just have to carry them forever and your grip's going to be smoked. Your entire body's going to be smoked. So good times, man. And there's also a lot of other low carrying that you'll have to do. You'll have to carry logs with contraptions that you make out of nylon and ropes with your team in a low carry position. You'll also have to carry ammo cans and probably some other things in that similar position. You'll have to carry certain things in a zercher position, like out in front of you, kind of like bear hugging. You'll have to carry some stuff on your shoulders, carry some stuff on your back. it's a lot of carrying, and obviously you're going to be carrying your ruck the whole time. So it's a good time, but it's very doable. Everyone who has ever passed selection has gotten through it. So don't freak out too much. Don't spend too much time worrying about it. Just an event you got to get done, and get done any way you possibly can. Next question. Enjoyed all your programs. Any plans on releasing another PDF program? Yes, I am actually working on one right now. It's a 2 and 5 mile improvement program for running. And the other programs that I have created in the past, those were all created before I had several dozens of clients. And right now, clients get most of my attention. So that's my priority, of course. But in some of my free time, I work on programs. The first thing that you can expect from me as far as new stuff on the website is going to be a recovery guide for SFAS Prep or any selection prep. It really applies to any selection prep. That is going to be an ebook. And right now I'm in the final editing stages before I hand it off to my wife for her to make it look pretty and put it into an ebook format. And it's probably going to be somewhere in the range of 55 pages or so, maybe even more. So that took a lot of work. It's still taking a decent amount of work and effort, but that's going to be the first thing coming out. That'll be out most likely within the next month or so. And then the program probably should be out before summer, but no promises. I have lots and lots of things on my plate, and the program is just one of them. I definitely put a lot of time and effort into these programs to make them as suitable as possible for as many people as possible. And so that's the goal. So I would expect that pretty soon. And then I would expect future programs to come out thereafter, but not at a super fast, regular rate, a little bit more sporadic and longer time in between each one. But I do appreciate you checking out all the programs, and hopefully you got something really good out of most of them. And yeah. Awesome. Next question. What are your favorite sleep aid supplements / micronutrients? Yeah, so it's important to make the distinction between a sleep aid, as in like used primarily for sleep, and micronutrients, as stated in the question, that can help you sleep. Micronutrients that a lot of people are typically not necessarily deficient in, but insufficient in. There's a little bit of a difference. Deficiency in certain micronutrients can be very bad, like health threatening. Insufficiency means you're probably okay, but you could still benefit from more. Vitamin D is a very common one. A lot of people will be in the normal range of vitamin D, which is like 30 to 100, and they'll get their labs back. And if their doc just kind of is a block checker, which most docs are, which rightfully so, they don't have time to give everyone a perfect protocol for everything. But if they're at 40, they're in the range. And although they're not deficient, they're still not optimal, and they could benefit from that coming up. And most people are vitamin D insufficient, and they could benefit from lots of additional vitamin D. That's just one example, and it's not necessarily a sleep one, although being insufficient in vitamin D probably will affect your sleep. But one big one that I like to prioritize is magnesium. The most recent labs I got done finally showed that I was optimal. I had optimal levels of magnesium after I've been supplementing with it for quite a while. So I take magnesium nightly. I take bisglycinate as well as L-threonate. Bisglycinate is more of a not a muscle relaxer, but it allows for like proper muscle function. And it also helps you with relaxation. It's not like a muscle relaxant drug or anything like that, but it definitely can help if you are training a lot, or if you are feeling restless at nighttime and you struggle falling asleep and staying asleep. Magnesium bisglycinate is great. L-threonate is more of a brain health / anti-anxiety supplement. So threonate crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's very bioavailable. Your body absorbs it and uses it better than a lot of other forms of magnesium. So those are the two I use. Some forms of magnesium are not great. Magnesium oxide, which is what you'll usually see in most magnesium supplements at like the grocery store or something like that. Basically, that your body doesn't really absorb that very well, and it can act as a laxative. So unless that's what you're going for, I would kind of steer clear of that. I would go online and look for good sources of magnesium. Magnesium citrate is another good one that I haven't mentioned yet. But those are all great. I take those every night, and I definitely notice a benefit to my sleep. Occasionally I'll take L-theanine. L-theanine is just a good way to kind of relax and wind down for the night. Coincidentally, you can also take L-theanine in combination with coffee or caffeine, and it's kind of like a synergistic effect on the caffeine. So caffeine kind of just makes you more alert and a little bit more wired overall, and theanine kind of helps you narrow that focus. So it's a pretty good nootropic to mix with coffee. It doesn't like make you tired or anything. It doesn't make you tired at night either. It just can help you wind down in the evening. So I'll take that a few nights a week if I'm feeling a little bit wound up, usually like 200 milligrams, sometimes 400 milligrams before bed. And then if I really need a big time extra boost for sleep, I will take a CBN product. Cured Nutrition is the brand that I use. No affiliation, but that is not something to use regularly. And if you're in the military, definitely don't use it because there's trace amounts of THC in it. So you possibly could piss hot on a piss test. But now that I'm out, I don't really care about that. And you don't feel high from it. You don't feel really anything. I just get a really good solid night of sleep. It definitely decreases my REM sleep a little bit, which is not necessarily the main reason I don't take it very often. And because if you take it super often, you can somewhat develop a tolerance to it. So I'll take this if like I've had like 2 bad nights of sleep in a row and I really, really need to sleep and just get some good solid recovery. I get lots of deep sleep when I take this and I feel really good the next day, but I still don't really look to take it every single night. It's probably 3 to 4 times per month, if that. That's all I take now. And the reason that I don't take anything else is because, well, the primary reason is because almost all of my sleep habits are very, very locked in and dialed in. I talked about sleep habits a lot in the last episode. You can check those out. But if your sleep habits and your sleep hygiene is not accounted for and you're kind of all over the place with those, then these supplements really aren't going to do all that much, if anything at all. So that's like by far the most important thing. These will give you like the last 2% of what you need for a good night of sleep. And you honestly don't need any supplements. There are some other supplements that work pretty well for sleep. Chamomile tea, lemon balm, apigenin, and inositol are all solid sleep supplements. I am not a huge fan of melatonin unless using it for changes in time zones. If you go to a new time zone, you want to get on a new circadian rhythm, melatonin can be good, but a lot of people use it every single night. A lot of people don't realize that melatonin is a hormone that your pineal gland in your body actually produces. And when you take exogenous hormones, which is what by definition melatonin is, an exogenous hormone, like TRT, obviously not the same as TRT. You can buy it off the counter, over the counter, but a lot of countries don't sell it because it is literally putting an exogenous hormone into your body. But either way, you can't outsmart your physiology, and at some point your body's natural melatonin production is going to decrease. Additionally, a lot of melatonin supplements that you'll find at grocery stores or pharmacies or whatever it may be are overdosed. Most sleep experts recommend somewhere in the range of 0.25 to 1 at the most milligrams of melatonin. And you'll notice that a lot of melatonin supplements are 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, up to 10 milligrams. And I've heard some people taking 2 10 milligram doses of melatonin. More is not always better. The right dose is always better. So I typically recommend just steering clear of melatonin unless you're using it for that one particular case where you just change time zones. When you take melatonin in the doses I just kind of mentioned, the higher doses, it takes a long time to get fully out of your system. So you're kind of going about the next day in a state of there's melatonin still in your system, and you don't want melatonin in your system throughout the day if you want to be awake and alert and able to focus and feel good and energetic, etc. So a lot of people will unknowingly just have like melatonin in their system all the time because they take a 10 milligram melatonin every night and it's just circulating throughout their system all day the next day. They take it again and it just kind of builds up and their melatonin levels are super high throughout the day. It's not ideal. So highly suggest, if you're a melatonin person, at least tapering it down to a lower dose or just not taking it anymore. Or you can taper it down and then all the way down to where you're not taking it. That way you're not relying on it. Your body will eventually start producing melatonin again and you will sleep better and you'll also feel better throughout the next day. So that's my best recommendation on melatonin. But any of those things can work. Just get your habits dialed in. That is definitely the thing to focus on first. Supplements are not some sort of get out of jail free card. They are just supplemental. Crazy, I know. Next question. Do you have a post-workout stretching routine that you usually do? No, I don't stretch after a workout, but you absolutely can stretch after a workout. Nothing wrong with it. What I typically do, and this is really important for recovery and just feeling good the rest of the day, you want your body after a training session to get into a parasympathetic driven state as quickly as possible. So when you train, you are sympathetic, which means another word for that is fight or flight. Your body is not in recovery mode. It is in perform mode, be awake and alert. And you also release a lot of stress hormones at this time, adrenaline, noradrenaline, epinephrine, stuff like that. So the sooner you can get out of that state post-workout, the better off you're going to feel for the rest of the day. And also the better you're going to recover, because when you're in a parasympathetic state, that is when you rest and digest and replenish and recover, etc. So any sort of strategy that helps you calm down after a workout is something to do. And it should be something that you actually look forward to and that doesn't stress you out extra. Just because something's good on paper for this particular goal does not mean it's good for everybody. So if that's stretching and like calming down and doing some calming diaphragmatic breathing for you, absolutely do that. Awesome. For me, I like to go outside and get some steps in, just really slow, unintense walking, and focus on some good box breathing or some double exhale breathing. Box breathing, if you think of the phases of your breath as a box, inhalation, hold at the top, exhalation, hold at the bottom. Basically, think of that as a box, and however many seconds you do your inhale, hold that for the same amount of seconds, exhale for the same amount of seconds, hold at the bottom for the same amount of seconds, and repeat. You want to be doing this through your nose, diaphragmatic, like into your belly. A lot of people call it belly breathing, not chest breathing, not mouth breathing. And, you can start with like 4 seconds per phase or 5 seconds per phase. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, the longer each phase of the breath can be. There's no magic number or anything like that. But a double exhale breath would be the same thing, except the exhale is double. So for example, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 8 seconds out, and 4 seconds hold. So anything that'll get you calm down like that. You can also do some light stretching. You can do some light foam rolling. It shouldn't be like painful, really stressful stuff. It shouldn't be like dynamic stretching. That's better to do pre-workout to get yourself kind of ramped up. You can sit down or lay down and just focus on that breathing. It doesn't have to be while you're walking or while you're stretching. Just anything that will get you into that parasympathetic state so that you can start recovering is a good habit. And you're not going to feel this the first time you do it or the second time you do it. This is the big thing. A lot of people will try this and be like, yeah, I didn't feel any difference. That's because it doesn't work on a single time basis. You have to do this on a regular basis. It has to be a consistent thing. And it doesn't have to be long. I usually walk for 7 to 15 minutes after my workout. Once in a while, I'll go a little bit longer if I have a bunch of time or if it's really nice out. But the thing I like about walking, and the reason I don't recommend doing it inside if the weather is appropriate, is because you're also getting a bunch of other benefits. Being in nature is very beneficial to your mental health and your physical health. Being in the sun is very beneficial to your physical health and mental health. Not being on your phone or looking at your phone is very beneficial to your health. So a lot of people will go into their cool down. They'll still have the music cranked, or they'll be scrolling social media or buried in their phone in some way, and they'll just do it on a treadmill. You need to think about all the other potential benefits of what you could be doing besides just, okay, I'm going to go check the block by walking on the treadmill and consider that a cool down. It just doesn't work that way. When you're scrolling social media, you're releasing these stress hormones, you're playing the comparison game, and people in general, humans in general, spend too much time on their phones, too much time inside, and getting outside for that walk, I think, would be way more beneficial than stretching. But stretching also works, depending on the weather too, also works. So whatever you can do to calm yourself back down, even though it's really tempting to ride the high of the workout, keep the music cranked, you're going to feel better throughout the day when you do it consistently, and you're going to recover better. Next question. Shins and calves get tired in zone 2. Should I stop completely, push through, or slow down? Yeah, so I get questions like this a lot about muscle groups that are being worked or being utilized for certain exercises, being fatigued from that exercise. When you're using a muscle for exercise or movement, you should hope that that muscle gets a little bit fatigued. Like, that is completely normal. You're using your shins, you're using your anterior tibialis is probably what he's referring to. It's the muscle outside your shin bone. You're using your calves in order to run. So I would hope that these muscles do get tired, and I would just embrace it and continue. Eventually, they're going to feel less and less tired as you consistently keep running. Not like throughout the run necessarily, but after you run consecutively, consistently at the right pace and an appropriate distance, week after week after week, you're going to feel less fatigued in these muscles. So totally normal part of the process. Now, if it's like pain, like sharp pain, the difference between good pain and bad pain is something that you have to learn eventually. Like, training should be a little bit painful, although a zone 2 run should be relatively low pain, hopefully, unless you have something wrong. So if, your shins are screaming in pain or something like that, or your Achilles or whatever, then yeah, maybe you want to take a different approach, maybe slow down or stop or address them by seeing a physical therapist or something like that. But a little bit of fatigue in muscles that you're working, like people will say, I do deadlifts and my lower back is really fatigued. Well, it should be, because you're using your lower back in a deadlift. Like, that's how it should happen. So just totally get comfortable with it. It's totally normal. Continue going. It'll get less and less over time, but it's something to expect when you are training a muscle or you're doing some form of training that involves specific muscles. I would expect those specific muscles to get fatigued. Next question, how would you plan 4 runs per week? Currently have 1 interval, 2 easy, and 1 tempo. That sounds like a pretty good split, assuming your base is good and you are trying to actually get better at running. If you're just running for health, you don't necessarily have to do intervals and tempo work. You can, absolutely, but it's not necessarily going to make your health better. I would do intervals once in a while, some sort of VO2 max duration intervals, which is anything from like 2 to 8 minute intervals, maybe 10-minute intervals, at a very intense but repeatable pace. But if you're trying to get better at running, this is a great way to do it. One thing I would consider is for repeats / intervals, same thing. I would do those while you are not fatigued. So a lot of people, for whatever reason, like to put intervals towards the end of their training week after they've done a bunch of other training leading into it throughout the week. And therefore, they're already kind of fatigued, mentally and physically fatigued. This is a very fatiguing mental and physical fatiguing workout. So you want to consider doing intervals while fresh, either after a rest day. A lot of people take Sunday off and they start their training week on Mondays. Most of my clients do that, and I have them do their interval work on Mondays while they're fresh before they get into the rest of the week of training. So those are very fatiguing and they should be treated as such. Additionally, you want a decent amount of space in between your interval work and your tempo work. Doing these, back-to-back days would be not a good idea at all. 48 hours at the very, very minimum, if you recover really, really well from running and you're not doing a bunch of other training in between, you could probably do 48 hours. I personally like 72 to 96 hours. So you could do like intervals on Monday and tempo on Thursday, or tempo on Friday, something like that. And then you can kind of place your other slower runs, probably a long run on the weekend or something. You can place those in as desired. Just, you can do easy runs basically whenever you want. Like, obviously, if you have a solid base and you are well fueled, well recovered, you can put an easy run basically on any of those days, as long as the more intense work is done more spread out. The tempo work, you don't necessarily have to be as recovered depending on what you're training for. If you're training for like selection or something like that, it can be beneficial to potentially do the tempo work while a little bit fatigued. So at selection, you're going to have to be running at close to a tempo pace, hopefully a little bit faster than a tempo pace for your gated runs during the first week. And you're going to be a little bit fatigued going into those. So if you're only ever doing tempo runs with no fatigue at all, you might be in for a little bit of a shock when you have to do it on like day 5 of gate week. They always have them on different days, so that's just an example. But doing some occasional tempo work, because it's lower fatigue, it should be lower fatigue, and it should be lower mental stimulus and mental fatigue, mental stress going into that workout than an interval session. Doing it occasionally while you're fatigued is totally fine, and probably something I would do if you're training for anything like any sort of running performance, because you're just going to be fatigued sometimes and you're going to have to run anyway. So you don't necessarily always have to do it while you're already tired, pre-fatigued. But if you're going to choose one between the tempos and the intervals to do with a little bit of lingering fatigue from previous sessions, that is probably the one to choose. Next question. What is your favorite part of the Q course? I will say probably two parts. One, the actual thing that we did, and the other one was just like the phase of the Q course because of the lifestyle kind of outside of the classroom. So my favorite part of the actual Q course, like work-wise, was going to Tampa for my medical clinical rotations at the end of SOCM, which is the Special Operations Combat Medic course where medics go for part of their medical training. It's a 9-month course, and this is like the very culmination, the very end. You get sent to a hospital and you do a rotation working in the hospital, multiple different departments of the hospital. You get lots of different experience in lots of different things. And you also do a couple of runs with the paramedic team, like the local paramedic fire department. So do some trauma calls and stuff like that. Although most of the calls when I did my run with the paramedics were mostly just like people with diabetes or people with chest pain or people with anaphylaxis or something like that. There was a little bit of trauma and those were interesting, but some guys got to do like some crazy like multi-vehicle car accidents and stuff like that, which is wild. But in the hospital, I got to do some things that I really never expected to ever be in those kind of situations. One of the days that I worked, I gave a guy a chest tube. He was in the ER. He had been run over by a bull. He had gotten a chemothorax, which basically means the space between it's called the pleural space, the place between your rib cage and your lung fills with fluid. In this case, it was blood because he had gotten like a bunch of internal bleeding from getting hit by a bull at a rodeo. And when it's not treated with a chest tube is a tube that you actually stick in between the ribs that allows that blood to come out. Eventually that space will fill up and your lung won't be able to expand. So you won't be able to breathe properly. So it needs to be treated with a chest tube. There's also a pneumothorax that's more common with like a gunshot wound or something like that, where it just fills with air. So you have some sort of hole in your chest wall that allows air to come in, but that air doesn't come out. It just comes in and continues to build and build and build. And it can become what's called a tension pneumothorax. And that is when things get really bad. And that has to be treated with needle decompression for the interim until you can get the person an actual chest tube to allow that air to come out, but not back in. So a lot of guys at that time that were going to hospitals weren't getting chest tubes. And it's kind of a procedure that you want a lot of practice on. Obviously, we practice it several times, like in training, but not on actual humans. So that was pretty cool to do that in like an emergency room scenario, and no confetti fell out of the sky or anything like that. But I felt good about myself and it was cool. The SOCM guys get a lot more autonomy and leeway. We're allowed to do more things on those rotations than even like standard nurses are or standard residents, like actual future doctors. So they're very confident in our ability because we're confident in our ability compared to a lot of people that are training to be medical professionals. Obviously, those people are way smarter than I am, way smarter than most of us at like book smarts. But I noticed that a lot of them were very, very timid when it came to hands-on stuff. And the SOCM guys are always like, yeah, I'll try. Let's do it. So they give us a lot of leeway. The hospital rotations today, I went to Tampa General. There were 2 Tampa runs. One of them was in another hospital in Tampa called Bayside, I think. And there was one at, I believe it was Richmond, Virginia hospital, like near Virginia Tech, I think. And now I'm not exactly sure where the rotations are at. I think they still do one in Tampa, but I'm not 100% sure. But Tampa was very cool. We only had like a day and a half off while we were down there the entire time in a month. So we didn't really get to enjoy Tampa all that much, but it was a very cool trip. I helped deliver several babies as well. And yeah, really cool experience. That was probably my favorite part. My other favorite part, not because of the classroom portion, but just because of the lifestyle and the routines and habits I could get into, was language. Language, when I went through, and I believe it's still like this, was the last 6 months of the course. You go to class from like 9 to 4 every day, which is a very short day compared to most of the Q course, but it's every single day and you're literally sleeping in your own bed. I mean, in this case, I was living in the barracks because I was single and enlisted, but you can just develop a really good routine at that time. And it's the last 6 months. So when you're done language, you graduate and you show up to group. And I think one of the most important things that you can do when you show up as a new guy, especially if you're an X-ray, but this goes for anyone, that wants to make a really good first impression is to show up to group in phenomenal shape, like the best shape you've ever been in. And if you have the discipline required for a successful SOF career, you will take advantage of this schedule and actually ensure that you show up in the best shape you possibly can, so that you show up and make a really good first impression to your team. Some guys don't take advantage, or a lot of guys will hop on gear and get as jacked as possible and really, really struggle with any sort of PT event. When I went, we were almost all of us, as long as we got 300s on our PT tests. And I can't remember what the other, I think there was a 5 mile and a 12 mile that we had to get certain times on. But as long as you met the standards on those exceeded the standards, you had to get certain times on them in order to not have to do PT, mandatory physical training, with the actual cadre. So anyone who met those standards could do PT on their own. I personally was one of them who met the standards, so I would do PT on my own. And I got in really good shape, and it was easy to just get into a routine, get solid sleep, get solid nutrition, predictable schedule. Language itself was not super fun, not very enjoyable. It is very, very repetitive, and you don't feel like you get much better after like the first 3 months or so. I probably would have scored the same thing if I had tested out in month 4 as I did in month 6. Who knows? Maybe not, but it gets pretty old. It's long, and it's just every single day of the week. Get weekends off, 4 days, all that kind of stuff, which is not the case for all of the Q course, depending on what phase you're in. So I like that as well. And it was just kind of like a good way to close it out. So lots of other cool parts, but those are probably my 2 top ones. Next question, no hills for hill sprints. Is there something better than a treadmill I can do in place of it? Yeah, so I personally, it depends on what type of hill sprints you're trying to do. If you're trying to do steep, short hill sprints, replacing them with a treadmill is not all that feasible, just because treadmills only go so steep. And hopping on a treadmill to sprint as fast as you can for like 12 seconds on maximum incline is not all that safe to get on and off and not hurt yourself. And also, you're just, to make it more safe, you're not getting as many benefits as you could running as fast as you can up an outdoor hill that's steep. However, if you are doing like longer hill repeats on like lower incline just to get good at running uphill as part of your overall like mid-distance running plan, then treadmills are great. Treadmills are an awesome substitute. And there are some of the pros of treadmills actually kind of outweigh some of the cons of potentially doing this outside. The treadmill, you can control all the variables. So you can control the speed, you can control the incline to an extent. Of course, they only go so high. You can control your rest periods. You just hop off the treadmill or slow it back down and then speed it back up or hop back on, whatever it is. Whereas if you're doing it outside, you get to the top of the hill and you have to either run or walk or whatever back down to the bottom of the hill. So you can only, like, for example, if you only want to rest 30 seconds, but you're doing a really long hill sprint, it's kind of just not possible to do it because you have to get back down to the hill and you're probably not going to want to run as fast as you can back down to the bottom of the hill. Whereas you can absolutely do that on a treadmill. So I think treadmills are a great replacement. You can definitely do outdoor longer hill sprints for sure if you have a good solid hill, but that hill is going to have more variables in it. It's very uncommon to find a perfect hill that's just like the same steepness the whole time, the same angle, which is not a huge deal, but it's just you're going to have a more of a difficult time getting the variables perfect when you're doing them outside. That's not to say that they can't be done, but if you're trying to do what I referred to at the very beginning of this answer, the shorter, steeper hill sprints, and you don't have a hill for that, you don't have a good hill for that, and you also don't want to do them at a treadmill, which I kind of explained why might not be the best idea. You can replace a hill sprint with a very light sled sprint on flat surface, ideally on like grass or on turf, but you basically take a light sled, oftentimes just an unweighted sled. You want the weight to be something where you can still move fast, but it provides a little bit of resistance. So a lot of people will load these super heavy and just go really slow, which is not a bad thing or anything. It's just not going to build your speed. It's more of a strength building movement. But the benefit of using a sled as well as using a hill for really hard sprints, short sprints, is that it's safer. It naturally slows you down a little bit because it's providing some resistance. In the case of a sled, it forces you to kind of be more bent over because you probably have your hands up on the posts of the sled. So you're more bent over, which means you're less likely to overstride. And the fact that it is also slowing you down to an extent is making it less likely to overstride and pull a hamstring or something like that. Nothing wrong with sprinting on flat if you work your way towards it and you haven't done it in 5 years and you don't just launch into a flat sprint. But hill sprints, sled sprints are both great. They're both great options. And if you're doing them very slow, you can absolutely use either one, whatever one you have access to. If you are doing longer ones, I highly suggest either finding a hill outside, maybe a slight hill, maybe a long slight hill, or doing it in a more controlled setting on a treadmill. Next question, is it possible to do well in team week as an introvert? Absolutely. In fact, I would say being an introvert is probably a little bit advantageous to team week. The reason being, a lot of people who are very, very good leaders, they aren't good leaders because they talk all the time or they're super duper vocal all the time. An actual trait of a really good leader is knowing when to talk and also what to say, and also knowing when talking is not necessary and leadership can be done in a different way other than saying words or yelling or whatever. So a lot of introverts are very good leaders because they know they don't feel the urge to talk all the time and they only speak when something needs to be said. So that can be a really good trait, actually. If you're an extreme introvert and you're not sociable and you don't do well in social settings, I for sure would focus on kind of improving that and just being someone who is like not super awkward or weird to be around, because you're going to be in a team environment and you don't want to be like known as the weirdo. To do that, you just have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations and actually make it so that you're more comfortable around people. Start conversations in public. If you're standing in line at the grocery store, start a conversation, go talk to a stranger, whatever. The more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to be and the less socially awkward you're going to be. But most introverts are not like crazy socially awkward. They just don't say much, which is totally fine. There are lots of different ways to display leadership. You can be a super fit, capable individual. That's going to get you really good peer evals and really good reviews from the cadre. You can always volunteer for the shittiest task or always volunteer to carry something longer or further than other guys. You can be the guy that is the first guy to get up and get his ruck on after you guys take a break. Like little things like that just show that you're motivated. Even if you're smoked and even if you're tired, the less you can display that, the less other people know how you're feeling, the better. And you want to be like a very stoic, like hard charging, gritty individual. That's like, all those are really, really good traits for team week. And oftentimes the people who are very, very extroverted just don't know when to stop talking, or they say the wrong things, or they speak when nothing needs to be said, or they are like the cheerleader type where they're just cheering people on. Like none of us want to hear that. None of your teammates want to hear a cheerleader. That's not a good way to be during team week. So don't worry at all about being an introvert. I am pretty extreme introvert. I would much rather be by myself and being around other people, although I don't hate it or anything. It definitely drains me. I don't remember who originally said this, but like one way to look at introverts versus extroverts is introverts start the day with 5 coins in their pocket. Every single time they have an interaction with somebody, they lose a coin. And by the time they get to 0, they're done. They're smoked. They don't want to be around anyone else throughout the day. Whereas extroverts start the day with 0 coins in their pocket. And every time they're around someone, they gain a coin. And the more coins they gain throughout the day, the better they're going to be. The more energetic, the more amped up they're going to be. That's kind of like the big difference between introverts and extroverts. So totally doable, not something to worry about. As long as you're able to identify your character flaws and weaknesses and potentially work on them, but at least be aware of them. So when you're super tired, they don't rear their ugly heads, which is basically the entire intent of team week, is to make people stressed and tired so that their character flaws show. So being aware of them is a great first step, and most people don't ever consider that, but that'll definitely help you get through. Next question, Nordic curl has some hype right now. Do you think it's worth investing time with it? It depends on what your goals are, but the Nordic curl is one of the most difficult body weight exercises that you can do in existence. If your goal is hypertrophy, Nordic curls don't really have a place in your program. Most people can't do a single eccentric portion, the lowering portion of one Nordic, which makes it a not great hypertrophy exercise to do half a rep of half of the part of the actual movement. So not great for hypertrophy. I would rather do some hamstring curls or some glute ham raises. Glute ham raises are similar to a Nordic, but they're easier to do because your knees are a little bit lower. And a glute ham raise is still definitely an advanced movement. And there's a lot of professional athletes that can't do a single glute ham raise, but it is definitely easier to do than a Nordic and takes less time to learn and get pretty good at. That does not mean it's completely safe and you can't mess yourself up. So definitely start slow. But in most cases, I would recommend a glute ham raise and doing really consistent, progressively overloaded hamstring curls, seated and lying. I like seated a little bit better because you get more length and stimulus, especially if you lean forward in the seat. And a lot of people do hamstring curls, but it's kind of just like a check the block movement. Like they don't really try to go really hard to failure or beyond failure sometimes with like myo reps or partials. They just kind of load it and they go till their hamstrings burn and then they stop. If you're not doing hamstring curls close to, or sometimes if you're advanced past failure, you're not really getting much out of them. And if you're not adding weight over time or adding reps or both, you're not really getting much out of them. So really focusing on your hamstring strength is important. And the Nordic can absolutely be a great hamstring strengthening exercise. And it can help with the ratio between quads and hamstrings. Most people, unless you really, really prioritize your hamstrings and like really neglect your quads are going to be more strong than your hamstrings. But for a lot of people, their quad to hamstring strength ratio is way out of proportion. Like they're very, very quad dominant and their hamstrings are very weak. And that definitely can make you more susceptible to lots of different injuries. So you want to really focus on your hamstring strength. You can get stronger hamstrings with hamstring curls or glute ham raises or stiff-legged deadlifts, etc. But a Nordic would be like probably the gold standard, like hamstring strength exercise. That being said, the Nordic, because it is so eccentrically dominant, like the lowering portion, a lot of people will do Nordics where they just do the eccentric and they kind of use their hands to push themselves back up, which is totally fine, before you can actually do it where you're bringing yourself up with your actual hamstring strength, which is very, very advanced. Not a lot of people can do that for a single rep, let alone multiple reps. But because it's eccentrically dominant, it is very fatiguing and it's very soreness inducing. After you do it consistently, you won't get as sore, of course, the repeated bout effect. But at first, it's going to definitely take a lot of fatigue. It's going to induce a lot of fatigue, and it's also going to induce a lot of soreness. So there's some trade-offs. Nothing in human performance is without trade-offs. There's no free lunches. So if you want to devote a decent amount of time to learning the Nordic, you probably have to do a bunch of banded Nordics at first, where you attach a band to a rack behind you. You kind of loop the band around your chest. The band helps you lower yourself in a appropriate manner, as well as raise yourself back up in an appropriate manner. Or you can do what I mentioned earlier, where you just go until your hamstrings are not able to control your descent anymore on the eccentric. And you kind of just push yourself up like a explosive push-up and come back to the top. You can do that, absolutely. But for most people, I would just stick to the glute ham raise. And I would start with a hamstring curl, get really strong hamstrings from that. And then I would go to the glute ham raise and just progress on that for a while. And then after that, if you're feeling like you want something new, go ahead, try the Nordics and see how they go for you. You're usually not going to like hurt yourself, but it's just it's a long learning process, and it may or may not be worth your time. The reason they're so hot is because they're a popular quote unquote knee bulletproofing exercise. And although, like I said, having strong hamstrings is going to decrease your risk of injury to include knee injuries, probably, there's no way to actually like completely make your knees actually bulletproof. I know it's a marketing term, but it makes these exercises more popular than they need to be. There are no like magic exercises that you can do. All reasonable exercises are going to be effective to an extent, but there's no like magic thing that is missing from your program that's just going to like make you unstoppable and superhuman. Next question, thoughts regarding using a weight belt for squats versus doing them raw for core strength. Yeah, so you guys might have noticed if you follow me on Instagram, questions that start with thoughts on are usually not very answerable because I could have like 10,000 different thoughts on a particular subject. But if you provide context like this guy did, then it is answerable. It's a very clear question that he wants the answer to, and I understand it, and I can definitely answer this pretty well. So first, let's get a little bit of semantics out of the way. A raw squat, in a powerlifting sense, you can still wear a belt. Raw means that the lifter has no knee wraps and no squat suit. So you have like equipped powerlifting where guys wear squat suits, bench shirts, and deadlift suits. Obviously, we're not talking about that, but non-raw powerlifting allows knee wraps. In raw powerlifting, you can wear a belt, and I believe you can also wear knee sleeves, just no wraps. So basically that means a raw squat technically would still involve a belt. But either way, belt squats versus squats with a belt versus squats without a belt. I would definitely suggest not being dogmatic and doing a little bit of both. The main reason that you want to be able to do a decent amount of squatting without a belt is because of like real life. Typically, when you do real life activities that involve squatting or bending down or lifting heavy things, you're not going to have a belt on. So being able to brace without a belt, which is different than bracing with a belt, you're using your actual abdominal wall to brace as opposed to bracing out against the belt. They're both different skills that are beneficial to know. So that's one reason I would do a little bit of both. Lifting with a belt will allow you to lift more weight. You're going to be able to lift more with a belt because you have an external force. Obviously, if it's a good belt and you're bracing properly against it, you're going to have this external force that's allowing you to brace, and it's going to make your core more stable and able to handle more weight. That being said, a lot of people take that to mean that it's going to make the lift safer, or that they're going to be able to lift way more weight, or they should always wear a belt because they're going to be stronger that way. That's not necessarily the case. Like I said, it's very important to learn how to brace without a belt because it'll keep you safe in the future. And also, wearing a belt and using more load inherently can increase the risk of the lift. So it's not a cape that you can put on and just get out of jail free card that will make it so that you don't get injured. So with that out of the way, I suggest doing a little bit of lifting without a belt, a little bit of lifting with a belt, and not being super dogmatic about it. There are pros and cons to both. Being able to move a lot of weight sometimes can be beneficial. And if a belt allows you to move more weight, absolutely use it. But sometimes maybe you're smoked and you're tired and you want to still get some movement in, but you don't want to go crazy heavy. Keeping that belt off will just force you to use less weight. And it can be a good little tool to keep your intensity a little bit lower so you're not completely smoking yourself or putting yourself at risk of injury. So you can absolutely wear a belt. The core strength part of the question, that's kind of a myth as well. The use of a belt, studies have shown that actually using a belt will activate your core muscles more and therefore potentially increase your core strength more than not wearing a belt. So you're not losing core strength by wearing a belt. If anything, you might actually be improving your core strength. So that is kind of not a reason to avoid belts. But if you go back to the other parts of the question, the answer, like that'll give you some good guidelines for deciding whether to wear one or not. All right, we'll speed it up a little bit here. Would you prefer bilateral or unilateral squat for SFAS prep? I would say both. Again, I wouldn't be dogmatic between doing a bilateral or a unilateral squat. A bilateral squat will allow for more loading. It'll allow for more force production. It'll allow you to get much stronger. So I would prioritize, unless you have really, really bad side-to-side imbalances, like your one leg is way, way stronger than the other one, and it's causing issues or pain or something like that. Everyone's going to have one side that's a little stronger and a little weaker. That's totally normal. But if it's really bad, which sometimes it is, that strong leg can take over on a bilateral movement, and the weak leg just gets weaker. The strong leg just gets stronger, and that imbalance is more exacerbated over time. But unless that's you, I would suggest prioritizing bilateral squat movements and also doing a little bit of supplemental unilateral squat movements, lunges, split squats, step ups, etc. Those are all unilateral squats and they're totally fine to do. One thing I would recommend, and most people just never think of this, and everyone always says how much they hate Bulgarian split squats and reverse lunges. Oh, these are so tough. If you're doing one leg at a time, and you probably want to be doing, for the most part, one leg at a time, you can definitely do some walking lunges or alternating lunges. But say you're doing Bulgarian split squats, a lot of people say they hate them, but I've almost never seen someone rest in between legs. If you're going hard enough on that first leg to get enough stimulus to grow muscle on a split squat in your first leg, you should have to rest. There should be no question in your mind that you're going to rest in between legs. For whatever reason, people think that just because it's a unilateral exercise and they have to train both legs, they think that they have to go one leg and then straight into the next leg. When you're doing that, you're giving your second leg the shaft, and you're also making yourself hate the exercise more. But also you're giving your first leg the shaft because you have to leave enough in the tank to get to that second leg and do the same amount of reps with the second leg. And a lot of people will have to cut their second leg short. So they're basically doing the movement to strengthen their weaker leg. And because they're not resting between sets, they're probably doing their weaker leg second, which is usually the best way to do it. You kind of match your weaker leg reps with your stronger leg reps and give your weaker leg a chance to catch up. But by not resting in between sets, they are going to not be able to do as many quality reps or as many reps in general with their first leg. So when you lift, you don't just build muscle fatigue, like local muscular fatigue. So for example, in the split squat, you're not just getting fatigue in your quads and your glutes and your adductors. You are also building systemic fatigue. You are out of breath. Your heart rate is up. Your overall bodily fatigue is still a thing. So if you're training hard enough, if you're pushing your sets close enough to failure to actually grow muscle from them, you're going to build up a good solid degree of systemic fatigue, and that needs to be rested from. So get that first leg done, then rest. Sometimes I rest 3 minutes between legs, sometimes, depending on how fatigued I am and where I'm doing it in the workout and how hard I'm lifting that day. So if it helps, if you see 3 sets of Bulgarian split squats, think of that as 6 sets, 1 set for each leg 3 times. So definitely not really the question, but something that I would for sure consider. But overall, for SFAS prep, you just want strong legs. You want a good solid base of lower body strength, knowing that you should prioritize bilateral squats, but also definitely don't count out unilateral squats. Next question, would it be wise to put a different form of cardio before lower body sessions instead of runs? So typically, unless you are a runner that is just using strength to improve your running and nothing else, you're not trying to get good at strength work and also running, I would not do any form of cardio. I would definitely not run before lifting. A little bit of a cardio warm up, 5 to 10 minutes on a cardio machine or 5 to 10 minute incline walk or something like that, just to get your heart rate up as part of your warm up. That's totally fine. But doing an actual cardio session that you are trying to develop your cardio and then going to lift, not the best idea. Primarily because that conditioning session is going to burn through glycogen more than a lifting session will. And therefore, it's going to affect your lift more than if you did it the other way around, if you lifted and then did cardio. That being said, if you are spacing them out, if you're doing a run in the morning and you're doing lifting in the evening, you definitely can do that as long as you have some good meals and several hours in between each one. You can also do a lift in the morning and you can do a run later, or you can do a lift followed by a run, so long as you have good pre and intra-workout nutrition. But I personally would recommend it seems like you're having an issue doing this. I would not do a run followed by a lift. I wouldn't do any cardio followed by a lift. You are just not going to get as much out of the lift. And you are also potentially putting yourself in a little bit of a riskier situation just because you're already kind of fatigued going into that lift, especially if you're doing compound lifts for the lower body. And it's just not a great order or sequence to do it. If we're talking about like the day before, if you're running the day before lifting, that's totally fine. I will say not all running is created equal. If you're doing a hard interval or repeat session the day before a lower body session, probably not the best sequence to do it throughout the week. I would probably do an easier run the day before and intervals either after a lift or on a different day. But I do this all the time. I go for long runs the day before leg day all the time. As long as you're refueling and recovering properly, it's totally fine. But I wouldn't do them back to back in general. Next question, opinion on best type of speed work to improve your 5 mile intervals, fartlek, tempo. Yep, all 3 of them are great. For 5 mile improvement, tempo runs and intervals. Intervals can kind of be used interchangeably with fartleks. Basically, interval is with actual rest in between each one and usually a little bit harder pace than a fartlek. Fartlek is when you kind of just jog in between each one. And fartleks are usually a little bit less structured, but they can be structured. Basically, fartlek is the Swedish term for speed play. So you can do a really structured one where you're running specific distances, recovering for specific distances or durations. Or you can just do like, sometimes I'll go do a fartlek where I go 4 telephone poles hard, 4 telephone poles easy, or 4 hard and 2 easy. or mix it up. 5 telephone poles hard, 3 easy, 7 telephone poles hard, 4 easy, etc. Doesn't have to be super structured, but it definitely can be. So I would use those two things interchangeably. You can kind of use fartleks interchangeably with tempos, but you don't necessarily have to. But I would probably do 2 speed sessions per week, assuming you have a really solid base. And for example, like our earlier question, you could do a repeat session on Monday, and then you could do a tempo run on Friday or Thursday or whatever it may be. Or maybe you do that for 4 weeks, and then perhaps the next 4 weeks you do fartleks on Monday and tempos on Thursday or Friday. Or maybe for the next 4 weeks, you do intervals or repeats on Monday and a fartlek session on Thursday or Friday. So those are all fine. As far as volume, a lot of people will do repeats, especially we'll talk repeats. A lot of people will do really short repeats, like 200 meter repeats, 400 meter repeats to improve their 5 mile. Although 400s can definitely be used to improve your 5 mile, no doubt. I definitely would make that the minimum. I would do mostly 400 meter repeats, 800 meter repeats, 1K, 1200, even mile repeats. And you want to make sure that you're not running these repeats all out. The word repeat means you should be able to repeat it. I talked about this several times, but I think it's worth reiterating, being able to repeat it. So usually you're going to do, if you're trying to get your 5 mile better, say you're doing 800 meter repeats, you're probably going to go at a pace that's like 5 to 10 seconds faster than your 5 mile run time that you've done recently that you have a time trial for. You shouldn't be going all out on the first one and then smoking yourself for the rest of them. For volume, typically something under 5 miles of total volume, somewhere between 2.5 to 3.5 miles of total volume. So, 3 miles of volume would be 6 800 meter repeats or 12 400 meter repeats or something like that. You don't necessarily have to do all the way up till 5. I actually wouldn't. That's just really fatiguing. 5 miles of repeat would be more like a half marathon prep or something like that. But yeah, those are all really good options. Just kind of go back to that last question as far as how to space them out, and you should be good to go. Next question, advice on getting good running shoes. Yeah, so ideally you spend the extra money and go to an actual running store and get a gait assessment. Usually most running stores have experts as well as technology in their store that assesses your gait and can prescribe you certain options for the best running shoes for you as an individual. A lot of people will see their favorite influencer or whatever online, and they'll see what running shoes they use. And they're like, oh, those must be really good running shoes because this person's really good at running. So I'm just going to go get those. And while that may work, unless you have like big gait inefficiencies or deficiencies, you probably can get away with most general running shoes. But I personally think to really take it seriously and to get the best results, I think it's totally worth spending the extra, however much money it is. You only really have to do it one time, and you can just continue to get the same or similar running shoes over and over again. So I think it's totally worth going and getting a gait assessment and having an expert recommend certain running shoes to you. That way you have one that really matches up to your gait and your individual goals and your individual abilities and needs instead of somebody else's. Next question, we'll make this the last one. Tips to stay productive in college and keep getting distracted. Yeah, so this is really hard in 2023. The world is full of things that want to distract us, and it can be very difficult unless you put serious systems in place to avoid these distractions. So I'll talk about a few things that work really well for me that I've learned over the years through other people's podcasts, reading, etc. One is to get really good sleep and ensure your nutrition is really good. If you are not sleeping well, or if you're eating really shitty food, processed food, you're not going to feel very good. You're not going to feel motivated. You're not going to feel like you have great ability to focus. That's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, you're in college, so it can be pretty hard to get really good sleep in college. But if you're going through a period of time where you really need to be able to focus, staying out late, partying, getting weird hours of sleep, sacrificing sleep in order to get things done is not a very good trade-off. So I would make sure those basics are dialed in, make sure your fitness is dialed in. You're just going to feel better and your brain's going to work better. So that's huge. The next one is to identify a time throughout the day that your willpower is the highest, your ability to focus is the greatest, you're the most creative, you're able to function cognitively at that particular time. Everybody has a time of day that they function the best at. For me, it's first thing in the morning. So this is beneficial in multiple different ways. My brain works the best, but also it allows me to get my hard stuff done the things that I don't want ruminating around in my brain done for the rest of the day, I get them done in the morning. That way they are knocked out. And later in the day, no matter what happens, I already got the hard stuff done, the important stuff done. So identify that time for you and really protect it. Whatever time it may be for you, if you can set your schedule up to always have the ability, or at least as often as possible, have the ability to get your work done during that time, you definitely should do that. Maybe it's early morning for you. Maybe it's mid-morning. Maybe it's afternoon. Some people are night owls. Maybe it's in the evening. Who knows? But identify it and protect it and stay consistent with it. The next one is time blocking. A lot of people will just write down all the things they need to do on a to-do list, but they don't have an actual plan on when they're going to do it, how long they're going to do it. They don't time block. So actually write down the time that you're going to spend on a certain thing. And to make this more effective, during this time, only allow yourself to do that. So remove all the distractions from your environment. Environment is huge. Remove all your distractions. For me, it is my phone. So in the mornings, I don't touch my phone until I'm done with my first couple of work blocks. And having that time where you don't necessarily have to work on the thing you're supposed to be working on, but you don't have any other options to work on anything else or to distract yourself with anything else. So you either work on it or you don't. But even if you don't work on it, a lot of creativity and like thoughts can pop into your mind if you're just sitting there bored. So it's very beneficial to do that. And I would do that at least once per day for at least 90 minutes. For me, I do 2 90-minute work blocks in the morning with like 20 minutes or so in between each one. Limiting your work blocks. You don't want to sit down and expect to just be very, very focused and just really productive for 3 hours straight or 4 hours straight. Most studies show that no longer than 90 minutes is a good amount of time for a work block. And then you take a break. You get up and you stop working and then you come back to it. During this break, another very important thing, whatever your biggest distractor is, whether it's TV, computer, internet, whatever, social media, whatever it may be, you don't want to use that during this break, because what you're doing is taking your break and using something that is your biggest distractor during that break. You're going to have to exercise a lot of willpower to stop using that and to get back to what you were doing before. Additionally, I talked about this a lot in the last episode. We only have finite amounts of dopamine throughout the day. So if you are putting your dopamine into something hard earned, like you're putting hard work into something, and you're getting that slow, steady dopamine drip that comes from challenging yourself and getting something important and hard done that maybe you didn't want to do, but you're accomplishing it. And then you go scroll social media, for example. This is probably my biggest vice. Scroll social media and you're getting all these additional dopamine hits. And these are not the dopamine hits you want. They're the cheap dopamine hits that really run your dopamine sources out quickly. And then not only are you going to have to exercise willpower to stop doing that, get back, but you're also going to be way lower on dopamine getting into your next work block. So do something else besides your biggest distractor during your breaks, whether it's walking around in nature. That's what I like to do. Or whether it is reading or stretching or getting a quick little sweat in, whatever it may be. That way, when you come back to your work, you still have plenty of dopamine to expend on it, and you have plenty of focus, and you don't have to use a bunch of willpower to get back into your work and get focused again. So that one's huge as well. Also, the last thing I'll leave you with is realize that we can accomplish a lot less in one day than we think we can. We can accomplish a lot more in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years than we think we can. So do your best not to overload yourself on a single day with way too many things to get done, unrealistic amounts of stuff to get done. I always commit to 2 90-minute work blocks first thing in the morning. And like I said, if I don't get to any of them for the rest of the day, if the rest of the day goes to complete shit, at least I got my 2 90-minute work blocks done first thing in the morning. So that's a win. That is a big win. Not a lot of people sit down twice a day for 90 minutes, completely undistracted, and get their important things done. Most people are living in a constantly distracted, get a little bit of stuff done, get distracted, get a little bit of stuff down, check email. Most people are living in that environment, and it's very, very hard to get anything meaningful done and do so in a way that makes you feel good. You're just going to feel crappy about yourself throughout the day. If you're just always getting distracted, you're not going to end the day on a high note. So commit to at least 2 90-minute work blocks, at the most 3. Don't try and commit to more than 3. I would start with 1. If you haven't done like one single 90-minute focus block, start with 1, get that done, and then go up to 2 eventually. or a 90-minute and a 60-minute or something like that. Don't try and overload yourself with way too many things to get done in one day, because you're just going to overwhelm yourself and you're not going to get them all done and you're going to feel bad about yourself. So be reasonable. Know that being able to focus twice for 90 minutes throughout the day and really getting high quality, undistracted work done is way more than most people ever do on a single day. And you should definitely be okay with that, instead of just trying to get everything done all in one day and then just not being able to do it and then feeling bad about yourself. So hopefully some of those tools you can implement and consider. It's definitely something that improves your life a lot once you can start to really focus on the important stuff and eliminate those distractions, or very much mitigate those distractions. It's hard at first. You're going to have to implement some discipline. You're going to have to implement some willpower and some good habits. But if you're just always having your distractions, whatever they may be, in your environment, it's almost impossible to do this. You actually have to remove those distractions, identify the distractions and remove them. And you should be on your way to more productive work, more success, and feeling better about yourself. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you very much for listening. Glad this one recorded, hopefully. And I'll be back soon with another episode. Till then, Terminator out.